What's up? Welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Glad you guys could join me today. My 2 cents segment is going to be about the Baseball Hall of Fame. So last night they had their annual induction. Derek Jeter, Larry Walker, both were inducted among others. Both, of course, very deserving. But I want to talk about some other guys that are either on the fringe of making it in the Hall of Fame or definitely the locks that are still playing today. So let's talk about that. And of course, my interview kind of coincides with that. So I want to do some Hall of Fame talk. Josh Rawitch is my interview. He was a former media guy, media relations for the Dodgers and Diamondbacks. And now he's the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So huge honor for him. And he and I worked together a little bit when I was with the Diamondbacks. So I want to talk about some Hall of Fame stuff. So a couple guys that had some big milestones this year are Miguel Cabrera and Joey Votto, and also Yadier Molina. So I kind of want to talk about a few of those guys and what their chances are to make the Hall of Fame. Some of them you might think are easy, and some other guys also that are kind of fringe. But I did want to go over some of the locks that you probably already know of. One of them being Albert Pujols. Obviously, all the numbers. He might be the best right-handed hitter of all time. I did a video on this, making the case for Miguel Cabrera being one of the best right-handed hitters of all time. And he definitely is. I'll explain his stats in a little bit. Two big name pitchers, at least for sure right now, that will get in the Hall of Fame are Clayton Kershaw and Max Scherzer, both 3-time Cy Young winners, both have a World Series and both dominant for their era of pitching. So I think both Scherzer and Kershaw will get in. And because Kershaw had a iffy postseason, as most people like to point out, he finally got his World Series, pitched well during the World Series last year. So I think Clayton Kershaw is a no-doubter. Two other guys that I saw when I was looking up some articles on guys' chances to get in are Justin Verlander and Zach Greinke. Both might surprise you with some of the numbers they have. Both have over 200 wins, which is a big deal. And Verlander's got over 3,000 strikeouts, and Greinke's got over 2,600 strikeouts, which may surprise you because you don't think of him as a dominant strikeout pitcher. But he had a run, man. I tell you what, Zach Greinke, I looked this up, had 6 Gold Gloves in a row to field his position. Greg Maddux, of course, was someone who was known for fielding his position well. So to have 6 Gold Gloves in a row from 2014 to 2019, Zach Greinke has a nice chance to get into the Hall of Fame. We'll see if he gets in. Verlander had a dominant stretch. He won the Cy Young and the MVP in 2011. So very impressive numbers by him. And he kind of has had 2 primes, if you really think about it. Verlander with the Tigers and then Verlander with the Houston Astros once he came over. Because he kind of had a resurgence in 2019 and won a Cy Young that year as well. So for as long of a stretch of a career as Verlander's had, he definitely has been considered the best pitcher in baseball a couple of times in his career. So I think Verlander gets in as well. But let's talk about those 3 guys off the top that I named. One of them being Yadier Molina, arguably the best defensive catcher of all time. Let me break down some numbers for you on Yadier Molina. So he has 10 All-Star appearances, 9-time Gold Glove winner behind the plate. This one's a crazy stat. He's a career 40% runners caught stealing percentage. That's the best among active catchers. So Yadier Molina, I don't know if you've been paying attention or not. Catchers don't get a lot of hype, but 40% runners caught stealing is really impressive. He's caught 2,081 games behind the plate, 4th most in baseball history, but it's the most for one player on one single team his entire career, which is really impressive. Offensively, of course, he doesn't have huge numbers, but he did eclipse 2,000 hits this year, which is a big deal for catchers, and he's going to get 1,000 RBIs probably next year. So I think he definitely gets in. He is going to have a stretch where he was the best catcher, at least defensively in baseball. And also one stat that's underappreciated. He, as a catcher, I guess, catching ERA for his staff, he has a 3.68 career ERA for staffs that he catches. So to break that down, when he catches, his staff has a better earned run average than the average catcher does. He's almost a half a run better than most catchers. So that is an underrated stat. He knows how to call a game. He knows how to frame pitches better to get those, some of those balls turned into strikes. Super impressive by Yadier Molina. So I think to be with one team your whole career, 10 All-Stars, 9 Gold Gloves, and a caught stealing rate at that number. And of course, there's all the new age BS stats that I don't want to get into, but just that alone should get Yadier Molina in, and he deserves to go in. One of 3 Molina brothers to catch in the big leagues. So Yadier Molina deserves to get in. Now, here's a guy that is on the fence. He's got the new age stats like on base percentage and WAR and all that stuff, which is Joey Votto. He's kind of been hiding in Cincinnati a little bit for his whole career. He did just get 2,000 hits a couple weeks ago, which is a big deal. He also has 1,000 RBIs and 300 homers. The problem is there's only 5 other first basemen in the Hall of Fame. Usually the offensive numbers aren't there or they're PED related. So like a Mark McGwire, guys like that. But Fred McGriff, AKA the crime dog, one of the best nicknames in all of baseball, didn't get in the Hall of Fame, and he's got 493 home runs compared to Votto's 300. So it's not all about home runs. Votto doesn't have the defensive numbers that other guys do. He does have the on-base percentage number, so 7 times leading the league in on-base percentage. I think that only 7 other guys, including, or I guess 6 other guys, including him, have ever done that 7 times. So to lead the league in on-base percentage, he's a clutch hitter, great numbers over his career, but I don't know if 2,000 hits is enough. And a lot of times with any Hall of Fame, whether it's NFL, NBA, whatever sport, if you have to think about it, he's probably not going to get in. He is 38 years old, not a lot of time left to capture some of those big time numbers. I don't think Votto gets in. He does have 1 MVP. It's, as people say, it's not the Hall of Very Good. So I don't know if he has enough to get in the Hall of Fame. But I did want to talk about Miguel Cabrera for a minute. So talk about impressive stats. And I just wanted to read you guys some numbers about Miguel Cabrera that are absolutely ridiculous. He's gotten 11-time All-Star appearances, 2 MVPs, 7 Silver Sluggers, say that 10 times fast, 4 batting titles, a triple crown, which means you led the league in batting average, home runs, and RBIs. Extremely impressive, really hard to do. There hasn't been one in a long time before that. So Miggy has that. And just for reference, he also won back-to-back MVPs, beating Mike Trout both years for those MVPs. And that was like prime Mike Trout, even though he could be still in his prime, obviously, but he's been hurt. So that was like ultra prime Mike Trout. So Miguel Cabrera has that. Cabrera is also 5th all-time in doubles. Albert Pujols is number 1, but he's got all the numbers, and eclipsing 3,000 hits next year will definitely cement that. I think he's a lock already, but Miguel Cabrera will definitely be in the Hall of Fame. So anyway, just wanted to run through some names with you guys, and maybe see what you thought. If you disagree or agree with anything, love to hear your comments on that. I got a lot of new videos coming out on Instagram. You can follow me there at Too Tall Sports Podcast. I like to do some interactive content. I got a series going right now, some of the worst and best stadiums I've ever played in. So you can check those out. Having a lot of fun with those and the surrounding cities, because, minor leaguers don't always play in the best cities. So wanted to go over that stuff. Also wanted to mention, I do have I guess you could call it a radio show coming out. So every Tuesday night, I'm going to be on this audio-based app called Colorcast. One word, Colorcast. And I'm going to have a 30-minute show. You can look it up. It's going to be Too Tall Sports. We're just going to talk about stuff like this. My 2 cents segment. We're going to have interactive conversations, going to bring people on to ask questions. It's kind of like that app Clubhouse, or there's some other ones. So it's, a talking app or Spotify Green Room, I believe. So it's kind of a back and forth. I'm going to host the show for 30 minutes. Brand new to this. I think it'll be fun, a little more loose, and get some fun opinions out there. But it's going to be Tuesday nights, 7:30 p.m. Pacific on Colorcast. So I'll get you some more details on that, but be on the lookout. It'll probably start next week. So I'm still working on a few final details with them, but I'm one of the creators they asked to be on their platform. So we're going to try it out and see. Maybe that'll jumpstart my broadcasting or radio career if I choose to go that route. But anyway, so Colorcast, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, starting on Tuesday nights next week. And I'll get you some more information when I can, but it should be fun. Let me know if you guys are interested in something like that, and I'd love to have you guys on and go back and forth for a little bit. So I will talk to you soon on that, and enjoy the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, football is back, NFL and college, and all of your NBA and NHL and playoff baseball needs over the next few months. And the Too Tall Sports Podcast is proudly brought to you by Vegas Sports Advantage. VegasSportsAdvantage.com. Use my promo code TOOTALL to get 25% off all of their texting packages. So what that means is they're going to text you right before a slate of games will start. Let's say for football Sunday, the games usually start, the first round starts at 10 a.m. They'll text you at about 9:50, 9:55. You got to be ready on your computer or on your app, wherever you bet your games, whichever sports book or sporting bets website you use your own. This is just a service that's going to text you their top picks based on the algorithm that they have set up. They wait till all the big sharp money comes in, and then they give you their best bet or two right before the games start at different times of the day. So they do text you the picks. You take care of them on your own and bet however much you want. They usually recommend 1 or 2 units of your normal, $50, $100, whatever you like to bet. Use your own judgment on that. However, VegasSportsAdvantage.com. Use my promo code TOOTALL. That's TOOTALL for 25% off all of the packages that they give you. They'll text you the picks. You get a certain number of picks, and then it'll run out, and you can use my promo code again if you want to. But 25% off. They're awesome. I use them. I make money off of them all the time. I use my own sports book that I've chosen to put my bets on. But Vegas Sports Advantage is legit. They use their algorithms. Check them out. VegasSportsAdvantage.com. Promo code TOOTALL. Okay, welcome back to another edition of the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. My interview is with new president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Yes, the actual Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. It's Josh Rawitch. He and I met each other back in 2012 when I was with the Diamondbacks in big league spring training. He was one of the public relations and senior vice president of communications for the Diamondbacks at the time. He's been with the Dodgers for 15 years before that. So long history of 27 years in baseball. Really enjoyed the interview today. We talk about all kinds of stuff from Tommy Lasorda to Manny Wood back in the mid 2000s to, everything that happened in between in his career, and then everything that involves the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And he's only 44 years old. So he's making waves at an early age. So happy to have Josh on and glad to reconnect with him. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. I'm doing a lot of new content there, a lot of interactive videos and more storytelling. So check out my Instagram at Too Tall Sports Podcast. I will also post some stuff on Twitter as well at Too Tall Sports. You can follow me there if it's more convenient to watch the interviews and see us live, not live, but pre-recorded live on TV, I guess, on YouTube. Check us out on our YouTube channel, Too Tall Sports Podcast. You can subscribe there. That would be awesome. Always looking for more subscribers. Share them with a friend, like, comment, whatever you want to do there. Just check out Too Tall Sports Podcast on YouTube. We drop episodes every Thursday at 9 a.m. on there. And even earlier than that on the audio side, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. Go over there and check it out, Too Tall Sports Podcast. If you could take a second, if you're listening to this, scroll down real quick at the bottom on Apple, and you'll see those stars. Please hit the 5-star if you think we're 5-star worthy. I think we are, but hey, it's up to you. Since we're providing good content, help us out. Drop a review underneath those stars if you would. Also, it definitely helps with exposure and getting us on the top of the charts there if we can for sports podcasts. So head over to Too Tall Sports Podcast, hit those 5 stars on the bottom of the episode page. It would really help us out. If you want to listen on Spotify, you can listen there as well. You can follow along. Just type in the same thing, Too Tall Sports Podcast. We're on Pandora. We're on Google Play. We're on Amazon Music. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're there. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. And with that, I will give you my interview with Josh Rawitch. Enjoy. Too Tall. Going crazy. All right, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is the newly incoming president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. He's worked in baseball for over 27 years, mostly with the LA Dodgers and Arizona Diamondbacks. He's been in public relations and marketing and eventually became the VP of communications for the Dodgers and the senior VP of communications for the D-backs. He is Josh Rawitch. What's up, Josh? Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Brett. Excited to talk to you.
Yeah, man, me too. Just for reference, Josh and I met in 2012 when I was in my one and only big league camp with the Diamondbacks, and he was just kind of starting out with the D-backs at that point, right? You're about a year in.
Yeah, that was my first spring as well. So I guess we kind of came up together in that spring.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. No, great to have you on. And just to say it on air, huge congrats to you to being the new president of the Hall of Fame. What's just the early stuff been like?
Oh man, it's in a lot of ways overwhelming. I mean, you everybody who grows up working in baseball, loving baseball, knows about Cooperstown and knows about the Hall of Fame. And then there's those who have been fortunate enough to visit. And I was able to do that a couple times before I took this job. But then to actually, as you said, become the next president of the Hall of Fame is really pretty heady stuff. It's really cool. It's a huge honor. And I'm just really looking forward to getting going here pretty soon in the next couple of weeks.
For sure. No, it's awesome to hear. And I want to dive into the Hall of Fame stuff in a little bit, but just off the top, were you really like a historian of baseball? Do you appreciate that side of things to come into this job and then it's all about history?
Well, it's funny. It's two different questions. I am not a historian by any means, but I certainly appreciate it. I mean, I grew up loving the history of things. I certainly read about all the names that most baseball fans know about. I dug into as a kid, but I would say that as time went on through my career in baseball, I wouldn't consider myself overly a historian. I just had a great appreciation for those who dedicated crazy amounts of time to understanding the history of the game. And now I find 15 minutes every single day to walk around the other side of this door here and go wander in the museum, take in some information. There's a lot to learn, and it's going to be years before I get through the whole museum and the Hall of Fame.
That's awesome, man. All right, we'll come back to that in a little bit because I want to spend some time later on that. But before we get to kind of your background in history, I couldn't help but notice you were just recently at the Field of Dreams game, and so I wanted to ask you all about that. Just initial thoughts when you were there. What were the biggest takeaways for you in Iowa?
Well, I mean, anybody who loves that movie, I mean, that event truly was bringing people to tears. I mean, I was watching people all around us during the pregame. People are wiping their eyes. People are playing catch with their kids and on the field before. Because one of the things that MLB did incredibly well was the game wasn't actually played on the movie set. The movie set is too small. So you basically got to come on as part of your ticket. You came to the movie set. People were playing catch with each other in the outfield. And then you literally walked into the corn, disappeared into the corn, and when you came out on the other side, you were in the major league entrance. And they've got the music, the audio playing, and you can hear Kevin Costner saying, "Is this heaven? No, it's Iowa." It was so well done. And then on top of that, the pregame ceremony was giving people chills. The way the game went, I mean, it was back and forth, walk-off homer. I mean, you just can't script it any better if it was Hollywood. And so I'm excited to see they're bringing it back. I'm sure it's hard to match up. Doing something twice can be a challenge. This was a first-time event, and they absolutely killed it. It was really cool.
Now, you would think they'd have a series there at some point, right? Not just one game, hopefully.
I think so. I mean, that's what some of the players, we were in Aaron Judge's news conference, and he said a lot of us were kind of wishing we had actually had a full series here. I think the challenge a little bit is, as you know, is just hotels. And so everybody was a good 45 minutes away. Nobody was actually staying near there isn't any place to stay, certainly not of big league caliber in Dyersville. So I think you'd have to get the union on board with having guys stay 45 minutes away in a hotel that's not big league. But if they went for that, I'm sure that the MLB would go for it.
Yeah, definitely. Did you get to see anybody like Kevin Costner or any other notable names that you got to talk to?
Kevin Costner was a couple sections over to my left, but I'll tell you that the one that I thought that was really cool is actually the guy who plays Kevin Costner's dad in the movie, who he says, "Dad, you want to have a catch?" Is an actor named Dwyer Brown, and he was in a VIP area before the game, and I was standing around talking with my son, and we took a picture of the three of us, and the guy looks he walked in and I knew exactly who it was. 30 years later, the guy looks exactly the same. It's like he's like one of the guys that came out of the corn and never aged, but he was a really cool guy. And there were all sorts of, former big leaguers were there. Paul Konerko, JJ Putz, former D-back. Got to see those guys, but really there was a little bit of a who's who of baseball that wanted to come out and see this thing.
I was curious. I know we'll talk about the Hall of Fame a little bit later, but as far as Hall of Fame items, because I know what Tim Anderson's cleats are going, Lance Lynn's hat, I think one other item, but what gets decided? How do they figure out what's going in the Hall of Fame and if the players are actually okay giving up a valuable item like that?
Yeah, it's funny because that's actually when I was there for this trip, I basically shadowed our vice president in communications, John Chestakowski, I had the same question. How do you guys decide? And so he said, before he even went there, they sat down with the curatorial department and they talked about what are some of the items that will best represent the movie. And so because the movie was as much about the 1919 Black Sox, more so than the Yankees, they tended to want to focus on White Sox items. So they wanted a uniform. They wanted the cap from the person who first threw the first pitch, etc. Then it was, okay, well, if something big happens, it could have been a walk-off. Well, I guess it couldn't have been a walk-off by the Yankees, but if it was a game-winning homer by the Yankees, we would have gotten that person's cleats. One thing we couldn't get that was interesting was the baseballs, because there was no way to authenticate. There were so many balls in BP that went into the corn that when a home run went in there during the game, you had no idea when you went and got a ball which one it was. So that wasn't really an option. And then in the 8th inning, one of the things that we try to do as well at the Hall of Fame is document the fan perspective. And so we saw a really cool sign up in the left field stands there, third base stands that said, I think, swing for the corn. And so we actually went to the woman who happens to be a 5th generation corn farmer in Iowa, because of course she is. And she was with her little son. And so we asked, would you mind if we took this sign with us back to Cooper? So she was beside herself. So it's a conversation partially with the curators in advance, and then also on site, you have to make that decision on the fly.
Gotcha. Well, you guys are
to answer your question about players, they are always willing to give something, because who doesn't want to have an item? I mean, every item in this building is donated. None of it is purchased. And it's all because guys want to have their items preserved for history.
That's true. Because I was thinking, like, don't you think you'd want to keep your cleats from, like, that's an iconic game, you know what I mean? But then you're like, well, it's going to be in the place that's celebrated forever. So it's not the worst place to have it, you know?
Yeah. And we're not taking, I mean, I'm sure he kept his bat and his jersey and his glove. I mean, he's keeping all these things. And so we do try to just take one little piece of it from them if we can, and then we preserve it forever.
That's great. No, I love it. Okay, now we'll get to your upbringing a little bit. So you're an LA native, grew up a huge Dodger fan, eventually able to work for them. But as far as just your early fandom of the Dodgers and listening to Vince Scully back in the day, what do you remember about those days?
Well, I was lucky enough that they won the World Series. I was 12 years old when they won in '88. And so, I mean, obviously Kirk Gibson's home run is just the seminal moment of my childhood. And I remember the last pitch by Ole Hershiser and kind of the excitement in my house that the Dodgers had won the World Series.
Yeah.
And you realize that when you're a kid and your team wins the World Series, it cements you forever. And so obviously not only one city gets to experience that every year, but you realize how big of a fan you can become. And so Vin was definitely the voice of my childhood. I was a huge Steve Sachs fan. I would sprint to first base after every walk, and I would wear number 3 just like him. And he eventually became a coach at the Diamondbacks, oddly enough. That I think that was the year you were there.
I think it was maybe after me. Yeah.
I think it was after you. But so, yeah, I mean, I grew up the biggest fan, and then getting a chance to work for them and meet all of my heroes was just, it's almost impossible to believe that happened, but it did. And I spent 15 years with the Dodgers after being a huge fan.
Crazy. Well, yeah, we'll get to all that in a second, but I did want to ask you, you chose to go to Indiana University, right? So a kid from LA, I always ask people that go out of state really far away for college. Yeah. What drew you in about IU?
Oddly enough, I had a cousin who grew up in Boston. He went to Indiana. And when he graduated college, he wanted to work in Hollywood. So he came and lived with us when I was probably 12, 13, really impressionable. And he would always talk about Bob Knight and Indiana basketball. And so my dad had a conference in the Midwest, and I went and looked at Kansas, Missouri, Indiana, a couple other Midwest schools. And as soon as I set foot on campus, I just went, man, this place is gorgeous. And I just absolutely loved it. And wound up spending 4 years there. So one of the best decisions I ever made was going to IU.
I mean, yeah, it's great to go out of state. I think it's a good thing when people do that instead of staying home. And then you come back home. And even before that started, at 18 years old, you were one of the few that got an internship to work for the Dodgers. You would come back, each summer and do so. What do you remember about the early years working for the Dodgers, especially in the 90s?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that my freshman year, it's very different now. You can't just, as a freshman, call up a major league team and get an internship. But 1995, the world was a little bit different. And so I got very, very lucky. I didn't know anybody. I sent a resume to Human Resources, which is not the way I would recommend doing it now these days, but it eventually led to the internship. And it was during the window when they had all these rookies of the year. So my first year was Hideo Nomo, and I got to witness what Nomomania was like, and all the Japanese fans who were coming out every single time he would start. And it was on the heels of Piazza and Karros and Mondesi. And then eventually I got to see Todd Hollandsworth. And so 5 of these guys in a row win rookies of the year. And you just think, man, this just happens every single year. And they were a good enough team that they were getting to the postseason, but they were getting swept. I think my freshman and sophomore years, they got swept out of the playoffs, and they didn't ultimately wind up winning a playoff game until 2004. They went on. It's hard to believe now. You think of the Dodgers as this juggernaut, but they probably had from 88 through 04, they didn't win a playoff game. I mean, they were pretty some pretty tough years in there. So, but I mean, ultimately, I loved every second of it. I mean, within about 2 weeks of being in the building as an intern, I knew this is what I wanted to do for a career. And I wasn't even getting paid. I was working for tickets, and I was more than happy to do it. And it's kind of led me on this path.
For sure. And some of the people you got to be around were, of course, Tommy Lasorda, who unfortunately passed away this year, but you spent looked like enough time around him, and also Vin a little bit, Vin Scully. Anything about those two guys that stick out during your time, at least in the 90s or early 2000s?
Sure. Well, Tommy, the thing that always sticks out for Tommy with me, because a lot of stories that I can't actually, of course, share on air, but he was exactly as you saw him. There was no phoniness. Some people looked at it and went, man, does this guy just full of it? And it's like, no, this is who he is 24/7. He just was always like that. Whether you're sitting at a lunch table at a Chinese restaurant with just you guys, or whether he's on national TV, that is who he was. And I think that's what made him so special, is there really was, you'd ask him about, he would sleep like 3 hours a night. Like, Tommy, aren't you going to sleep? I'm going to sleep when I'm dead. And he really believed it. Like, he was just going to make the most of every single second on this planet. And he really did. So he was the manager I grew up loving, watching, and then getting to work with him was obviously incredible. And yeah, Vin was my whole childhood. That's all. I mean, Vin, Ross Porter, Jerry Doggett, these are the guys I grew up listening to. And Vin is he's class personified in every way, no matter, he just always takes the high road on every situation. By the end of my career at the Dodgers, technically, he reported to me, which I thought was the strangest thing in the world. Like, Vin actually is like the only person who can fire his own boss if he ever wanted. But he just was classy at every single turn. And that's the one word that describes him. I think I would listen to him read a phone book. I would listen to him read anything. And he's just very, very genuine. Very good person.
No, I believe that. I've heard the same things as well. As far as the players go, I mean, you were there, even in that mid 2000s, kind of when Kershaw got drafted and those kind of guys. So maybe on the player side, who do you remember that kind of had an impact on you with the Dodgers?
Well, Kershaw is an interesting one because you think of how many people get drafted in Major League Baseball and how few make it to, I mean, there's been 23,000 people to play in the big leagues and about 230 that are players enshrined in the Hall of Fame. So you're talking about maybe 1% of all the guys are going to get enshrined. Right. And so to have been there on the day that somebody who more than likely, I would imagine, will wind up getting enshrined. I was there the day he was drafted, was there for his big league debut. And he, you could just tell at 18 years old, he had a maturity and a presence to him. I certainly couldn't have told you anything about his pitching ability that he would be this good, but you could tell he had a maturity way beyond an 18-year-old. And so I think he absolutely left an impression on me. I obviously got to know a ton of guys over the years, but Andre Ethier and I still stay in touch. Our kids played in the same baseball team when I was in Arizona, and he and I always had a good time. Guys like Rafael Furcal, who I just think is one of the kinder humans on the planet. I've some great stories I've talked to him about his life in the Dominican. That's the hardest, from being, you're on a team with 35, 40 guys every year come through these teams, and there's just incredible memories of 99% of them. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. I read that you became fluent in Spanish. Someone told you early on that it was going to be important for you, especially with all the Latin influence of guys coming over from the Dominican, Venezuela, and all the other Latin countries, in Mexico even. And I saw that over the years you helped out organizations like the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and other organizations. So what's the kind of the culture of the Latin or Hispanic culture done for you over the years?
Man, it was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. It was that first year as an intern, and Robert Schweppe was basically the assistant GM of the Dodgers. And he said, yeah, if you really want to work in baseball, that's what you should do. So I went back, I studied it for a couple of years, and I studied abroad, and I wound up eventually backpacking through South America. And I think there's a handful of decisions I think that I've made over the years that have really led me to a successful career. And that was one of them. Mainly because it opens up the whole world of people that you can talk to. And so whether it's players, putting them at ease when I'm helping them with stuff, broadcasters, media members, I've been able to take trips to the Dominican. And I remember there was our legal counsel at the Dodgers who actually speaks Spanish. He's still there. He didn't realize that I spoke Spanish, and we were hosting a news conference there. And I got up to the front of the room and just started started introducing the people on the dais. And I just remember seeing the look on his face, like, what is that kid doing? Where did that come from? And it's quite funny. Every year in spring training, one of the things I would do is, you probably remember, you give the media speech to the team and you talk about how to deal with reporters. And when it was done, I would always give 2 to 3 minutes in Spanish, just essentially hitting the quick highlights and saying, look, your guys' comfortability means is the same to me as anybody else. And this organization, we care about our players from Latin America. And every year, the Latin American guys would love it and come up to me afterward and think it was great. And the white guys would be like, where did this come from? Like Robbie Ray, every year Robbie Ray would come up and be like, every year I see it and every year it surprises me. Like, I always forget that you can speak Spanish. So crazy valuable skill that I would highly recommend to anybody wanting to get into baseball.
I think that's well said, definitely. Speaking of the Diamondbacks, so our last thing on the Dodgers, actually, before I forget. So obviously they won the World Series last year. You grew up a Dodger fan, worked for them forever, even though you were with the Diamondbacks for a long time. Did it hurt a little bit, or were you kind of happy for the Dodgers? How'd you feel when they won it all last year?
It's funny. I just got asked that earlier today by somebody else. What's weird is that I would have thought I would either be really excited again or kind of jealous and bitter that I wasn't there. And it was strange. After 10 years being away, it just kind of felt like another team. And I don't know whether some of that was the weirdness of the COVID season and the way that it all ended with I was more kind of like, what's going on with Justin Turner? The whole thing was just so strange that I remember sitting there with my wife and I looked at her and I'm like, I don't feel an emotion one way or another. I feel the same as if it was the Phillies or the Reds. So I don't know why that is, but I would have thought I would have had a totally different reaction than I did. And instead, what I will say is that I actually created a list of people at the Dodgers organization as the game was going on, and it was clear that they were going to win it all. I wrote down a list of all the people from the clubbies to the front office to the scout, all these people that I've known for years that had been working forever and that I was really happy for. And so I was able to kind of really be happy for them, because it just doesn't have, people work their whole lifetime in baseball and don't get that. And so it was pretty cool to think of all my friends there who did.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the special connection. But I guess you're a professional now, so you don't feel anything for any other teams, right? Or the D-backs need to win. That's what you're concerned with. So
you'd be surprised. I can't believe how quickly I moved from being a Dodger fan to a D-back fan. And I think some of it is, I wouldn't say it's the paycheck. It's not like I felt a loyalty because I was getting paid. You're just around it every day. And so when you're around people and you want to see the people you're around, good things happen to them, when your rival they're in your division. So I had to root against the Dodgers and I wanted good things to happen for the Diamondbacks. And it's just hard to, now they're, as my predecessor here, Jeff Idelson, has said, that somebody asks him who his favorite team now is, and he says, they're like my kids. I have 30 favorite teams. I love them all the same. So I'm going to have to get used to that mentality.
That's right. So you spent 10 years with the Diamondbacks. Even when I was there, all the people were great. And I remember it was a good organization, but just a little bit different than the Dodgers, right? That's the big Hollywood organization. So you go to the D-backs and it's a little bit different there. So how would you describe the 10 years you had with the D-backs and kind of maybe what you learned with them or what you remember about that decade?
Yeah, the biggest difference is just obviously the history. You have the Dodgers who are like you said, this global brand, and everybody you can call anywhere in the world almost, and they know who the Dodgers are. And the Diamondbacks, we were still trying to get people in Arizona to buy into the fact that this franchise, and we'd only been there for a generation. So I think that was the biggest difference, was just you're earning every single fan. The Dodgers put that roster on the field, and I don't want to say they can just sell 3 million tickets without trying, but you pretty much put that roster on the field and you're going to move some tickets. And at the Diamondbacks, we really had to earn every single fan, the whole process really was very different. But in terms of what I learned, I will say that I came to the Diamondbacks a totally different executive than when I left. Our president and CEO, Derek Hall, our owner, Ken Kendrick, they ran a model organization at the Diamondbacks, and it was there were so many things that Derek taught me about what it would take to run an organization. And I sat, my office was like 5 feet from his, and so even when he wasn't necessarily trying to teach me something, he'd invite me into a meeting and I would just soak up what was going on. And there were a couple times over the decade where he would say things like, I feel like you've got what it takes to be a club president someday, or a president of an organization. And then sure enough, this opportunity came along, and there's no doubt I would not have been ready for this 10 years ago had I been leaving the Dodgers. And I think everything happens for a reason. I mean, sure, I would have loved to have won a World Series with the Dodgers, but there's no way I would have had all the opportunities that I had at the Diamondbacks had I stayed. And so I think it just, it worked out in the end that I got both those experiences, and now here I am at the Hall.
There you go. Was there a thought for you, since you brought it up, to be in that kind of big time executive role as a president of a team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I've tried to always do is not spend too much time focusing on kind of what the next thing is and enjoy what I'm doing. So, I mean, certainly I'm relatively young, I think, for my position. So assuming I'm going to work for another 20 years, I kind of figured I probably hadn't capped out at the club level. But I don't know that I would have necessarily said, okay, well, I definitely have to be a team president. Or ultimately, I was kind of happy to see where things took me. And like I said, Derek had been so great about just giving me more and more. I was happy to keep taking on more responsibility at the Diamondbacks. And then somehow this thing popped up, and the next thing you know, I'm moving to Cooperstown. It's pretty crazy.
I will definitely ask you about that in a little bit. One random question: since you got to work at Chase Field a lot, they're known for their very innovative ballpark food. If you could describe maybe some of your favorites or what that whole thing is about. So talk about the Chase Field food.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm actually, it sounds crazy to say I'm really proud of that, but I am. We probably, maybe my second or third year there was another woman who was in our department named Katie Krause, and we kind of just talked about, how can we make this a foodie destination? And so we started having conversations with the Levy chefs about making what we called wow items. And it really was that the Chef Snoke back in 2014 came up with the churro dog. And that was really the first one where we went and we were actually in Australia promoting the upcoming series. This was actually the winter, the off season before 14. So I think it was November of 13. We're in Australia. We're announcing that the churro dog, I guess it might've been 14, but anyway. And it just, the response was global. I mean, it was literally went from a term that didn't exist to 2 million hits on Google within 2 hours. It was just, we literally created this thing out. And I remember the chef saying to me, this is going to be on my obituary. This is what I did, is I created the churro dog. It's that big. And so after that, every year we would kind of get together with the chef and, okay, what crazy ideas do you have now? And what do you think we could try? And I mean, I don't think that we've matched that level yet, but I'd say every year we would roll out something new. And I don't know that we were necessarily the first in sports, but we were among the first that were doing that. And now you see every year, every team is coming up with something a little bit wacky. And I think that's kind of cool. People come to the ballpark and they want to try that. We just saw at the Field of Dreams game. You saw, I can't remember what his name is, the chef, the crazy blonde hair, Guy Fieri, at the Field of Dreams game, created an apple pie hot dog. And it was all anybody wanted when they got to the Field of Dreams. And so, yeah, it was definitely something we took a lot of pride in, trying to make ourselves a food destination.
For sure. Especially if you're not winning the World Series, you got to come up with something, right?
Well, what's funny is how often we would announce these things and Twitter would just be stop making stupid food items and start spending the money on players. And I wanted so badly to respond, do you really think the budgets are the same? Do you really think the same people are working on the food as are the players? But, you're right. It always helped. That was honestly one of the things that Derek really focused on was, look, we can only control what we can control. We can put $120 million payroll on the field and it may not win, but we can control the fan experience. And so we would always work hard to make sure that even if a family went home after a losing game, if they had a good time, they ate good food, they were treated well by the fans, parking was good, it was easy to get in, all those things we can control. That's really where we spent our attention, and we let the baseball people come up with baseball decisions.
For sure. No, I agree with you on that. I did see in 2018, you were given the Robert O. Fischel Award for Excellence in Public Relations. So what did that mean to you to receive that award?
It was really, really cool because, I mean, it's voted on by the other PR people in the league. Every team gets a vote. And I remember my first winter meetings where I came in and I saw the person who got the award. And I just remember thinking how respected you must have to be by your peers to get that sort of award. And then whatever it was, 20 years later or so, to receive it, it really, it's as much a department award too. The Diamondbacks PR department is just, they're awesome. They really are great people. And so I mean, nobody ever goes into these things to win awards, obviously, but when your peers recognize it. And what's funny is actually the plaque that has the official award winners is literally on the other side of this wall. It hangs in the Hall of Fame here. And so when I walked in, the guy who's got the office right over there said, "You want to see the plaque for the official award? You're already in the office here." So really pretty cool and really grateful that they thought of me in that way.
For sure. I like that the guy's name is official because you're official.
He's official, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I did want, on a slightly less lighter note, I want to mention someone that passed away earlier this year. Pedro Gomez was a reporter. A lot of people might know him from ESPN. He was based in Arizona, so he covered a lot of the Arizona sports. You definitely had a relationship with him through the years, and just in general, maybe speak on him, the person, but also you were kind of the middleman between the players and coaches and the media, and having to deal with lots of different reporters and broadcasters and all kinds of stuff. So how would you describe the relationships you've built over the years being in public relations and communications?
Yeah, it's interesting. Pedro is the perfect example of it because when I really got to know him was when I was at the Dodgers and Manny Ramirez got suspended for steroids. He had his return, his rehab stint. I guess it wasn't rehab stint, but whatever. He was basically getting ready to come back to the big leagues. So we went to Albuquerque for like 4 or 5 days to play in Albuquerque. And Pedro was the ESPN reporter covering us down there. And so in a lot of ways, that kind of summed up what my job was. Manny had no interest in talking to the media. And of course, I'm dealing with him in Spanish. Actually, I'll tell a funny story there in a second. But he just kept, everywhere he would go, you'd have 20 media members following him in a pen. I'm like, Manny, this is going to go on for 5 days if we don't stop and talk to him. And so in a lot of ways, what you're doing is you're brokering that conversation. A lot of guys don't need it, but there's just 162 games with each other. You get on each other's nerves. And so a lot of times we're there to help the process between the reporter and the player. And in Pedro was so well loved. And obviously passed. Anytime something is sudden like that with a heart attack, it's this outpouring of support for him. I actually just read the book that was put together that was a group of basically stories about him by all of the biggest names in baseball. And it's like, I thought I had a great relationship with Pedro, and then I realized, man, he had this relationship with everybody. Like he just had a way of doing this with everybody. So, yeah. But to lighten the mood though, I will say, when we went to Taiwan in I think it was 2009, I want to say, with the Dodgers, maybe it was 2010. Manny basically, again, didn't want to talk to media. It had to be 2009 because by 10 he was already gone. He didn't want to talk to the media at all. And the promoters of this event had paid all this money to have, like, it was really the Dodgers, but Manny Ramirez was coming to Taiwan. This was a huge deal. And so it's the last day of the trip, and they said, can you find some way to get this guy to talk? And I said, let me work on it. So I go over, I'm like, Manny, I need you to do this. Finally, he's like, all right, fine, I'll do it on one condition. I'm like, what's that? He's like, it's got to be in Spanish. And I think he forgot that I spoke Spanish. So I said, okay, yeah, no problem. And he said, well, who's going to translate? I said, me. And he's like, oh, that's right. So we march into the interview room, and the questions would come in Mandarin. There was an interpreter who would translate them to English. I would translate it to Spanish. Manny would answer in Spanish. I would respond in English, and they would translate it back to Mandarin. And the whole room, by the end of the interview, everybody's laughing, and even Manny had a great time. And so, I mean, that in a lot of ways, that's what our job is, to have them feel comfortable, to help them understand that what you say does matter, and that it is important, even after a tough game, to stand in front of your locker and answer the tough questions. That's part of what makes the money in the game. I mean, there's contracts for major rights holders, and you gotta come through for that, because that's how you get paid millions of dollars to play baseball.
Right. I mean, just because you brought up Manny Ramirez, was there anything in your career with the Dodgers that was like when Manny Ramirez came to the Dodgers? You know, Manny Wood, all that, the hype, the craziness. He was obviously, I mean, he was on PEDs, but still, yeah. It was amazing to watch. So, was there anything comparable to that when you were with the Dodgers?
The only thing comparable was Nomomania my first year. I mean, Nomo was a huge deal, and by his first year, it kind of surprised everybody. I don't think anybody thought he'd be that good. He wins Rookie of the Year. He starts the All-Star game, all that. And for 96, 97, 98, I mean, we had one guy whose full-time job, I remember Mark Yoshimura was his name. His full-time job was to basically bring in tour buses from Japan, that when they came to LA, they were going to stop at Dodger Stadium and go to the gift shop and see one of his games. And it was just, you could, like, almost, I wasn't old enough to really remember Fernando Mania, but you just, the light bulbs, every time Nomo would put his hands above his head, like the lights are flying everywhere, and you're just so. I mean, that was the closest thing I think to Manny Wood. And obviously the fact that he was so good and it was down the stretch, and it allowed the team to basically push through. It just go to the postseason. All those things that. Unfortunately, on the Diamondbacks, I got to the Diamondbacks and they were not very happy with me at that point. They're like, "Yeah, you were the ones that ruined our chance that year," but it was unbelievably memorable.
For sure. I randomly this year, because I think Herman Marquez for the Rockies was close to throwing a no-hitter at Coors Field, and I found out the only one ever is Hideo Nomo at Coors Field.
And you'll appreciate this as a pitcher. He threw the whole game out of the stretch because I can't remember, it was a weather delay. There was some reason why he couldn't. I mean, he was known for that tornado weird windup where he'd swing around and throw the forkball, but he had to throw the whole game out of the stretch. And yeah, it's the first ever no hitter, and I believe the only one at Coors. I don't think there's been another since then.
Yeah, I think that is it, which is insane. I mean, it's obviously a hitter's park, but okay, let's get to the Hall of Fame. Of course, it's a great honor for you to take over as president. Tell us how the opportunity came up, and how long did it take you to say yes?
Well, it came up. Jeff Idelson, who was at the Hall for 25 years and president for 10 or 11 of them, really came to me and said, "I think you'd be a great fit for this position. I think this job is different than maybe some other presidential roles. This job has a lot of interaction with the actual Hall of Famers. It's a lot of interaction with media. It's a lot of things like this, honestly, being a public face in a lot of ways of the Hall. And so where some places may be looking for more of a traditional revenue generator or legal or finance, I think my background kind of lent itself to Jeff thinking that I would be a good fit because that's the background he came from. So he's the one who got me involved in the search. It took multiple months really from the first conversation. It's crazy, but actually today is Cal Ripken Jr.'s birthday, and I called him this morning just to wish him happy birthday because that's what I guess I do now with Hall of Fame.
That's pretty cool. Yeah,
he was part of the interview process. He actually interviewed me because he's on the board of directors. Commissioner Manfred was one of the people that I interviewed with. Harvey Schiller, a very respected executive throughout the world of sports and baseball. And then ultimately Jane Forbes Clark, who is the chairman of the board here and whose family her grandfather started the Hall of Fame back in 1939. All of those people were involved in the process. So you imagine it took quite some time. When she actually offered me the position, it did not take long for me to say yes. But the process of going from when Jeff first said, "Hey, I think you'd be good," to actually accepting the position was a couple months. And obviously throughout that, it was a lot of conversations with my family about making sure that we were comfortable moving across the country and from a big city to a small town. And obviously nobody's afraid to tell me about the weather out here. I keep hearing about how cold the winter is going to be. But I think all of that's worth it when you're talking about representing something that is truly the mecca of baseball.
And I know you've dealt with big time players, obviously, but Cal Ripken's a big name. So what was it like talking to him when you were in the process?
In a lot of ways, it's just very surreal. I mean, you're right. I have had the chance to work with, a dozen Hall of Famers over the years. So it's not so much, I think I probably long ago lost the being starstruck, but you're just very aware. Actually, it's pretty funny. The day that I interviewed with Cal Ripken Jr., I actually also had Harvey Schiller right afterward. And so at the very end of the interview, I said something about how I have another one right after this. And he's like, "Oh man, I couldn't do two of these in a row." And I was like, "Well, with all due respect, you're the Iron Man. I mean, you played how many consecutive baseball? I think you had some double headers in there." He's like, "Yeah, that's a good point." But you're very aware that the people you're talking to have done incredible things with their life. And that's pretty cool when you're talking. The commissioner of baseball is an incredibly impressive man who's dedicated multiple decades of his life to our sport. And so talking to him and Jane Forbes Clark, who has grown up in this town and whose grandfather started the play and had the foresight to think, okay, I'm going to put this Hall of Fame here in Cooperstown, and millions and millions and millions of people have come to see it. That's a pretty cool group of people that you're talking to.
Definitely.
And, yeah, quite an experience, but I'm glad it landed on me.
I got to go there when I was 12 for like the Little League playing there. And, you know, I
Mhm.
was really young, but I remember Pete Rose, we had to pay to get his autograph when we were there. It was a big deal or whatever, but it was still cool to get that. And, you know, like I said, I was young, but just being around it, I would love to go back at some point, but I was just thinking about for your kids at that age, obviously it's a big change. You know, Arizona's a little bit different than Cooperstown, like you were saying, but how do you think it's going to be like community wise for you guys there?
I mean, they have been so welcoming, everybody here, and obviously it's a small town. So I've literally had people walk up and they know who I am because they either saw it in the local paper or they've heard, and they've been fantastic about it. My son actually would have played in that same tournament you were just talking about, the 12-year-old next year. He was supposed to be coming, and so his team is still going to come out, and he's already gotten himself involved in baseball here. My daughter, they start school in about 2 weeks. My daughter's getting ready to get involved in some activities as well. So I mean, we have the biggest thing is the only real way to do this, I think, is to immerse yourself, and we are going to be as involved in the community as we possibly can be. And I'm sure there will be challenges that come with the weather and the small town life, but I'm sure they'll be outweighed by all the really cool things that come with this job and with this town.
Definitely. So are you going to be like in the museum all the time and walking around with people, get like helping tours and stuff like that? Are you going to be, what's kind of going to be your role day to day there?
Well, it's funny because I overheard my son talking to his friends in Arizona a couple of days ago. He's walking around the house on FaceTime, and one of them said, "So your dad's going to be the guy that gives the tours now?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, with all due respect to the tour guides who are incredible at what they do, obviously it's a little bit different than the role I'm coming into. Yeah, it's not quite what I'm doing, but I'm sure I will give my fair share of tours to people that come out. Yeah, I mean, ultimately our offices are right on basically on one side of the plaque gallery and the museum. So I've made it a point every day to go in there, and I try to just pick up a couple new things. I mean, there are so many things to learn about baseball history. I mean, there's only so much you can take in on a daily basis, but more so, I mean, really the job it's running the business of the Hall of Fame, which is a 100-person company. It's dealing with all of the living Hall of Famers. There's 72 living Hall of Famers, and putting on the induction ceremony that's happening in 2 weeks is obviously a huge undertaking for a small staff and a small town. And then it's a nonprofit. So, I mean, I don't know that most people realize that the Hall of Fame is a nonprofit organization. It's not run by MLB. It's not funded by MLB. We have to go out and fundraise. And so we have people who become members and they donate money. And so part of that will also be my job is trying to help people understand that piece and see if we can't get people to donate money to help preserve history.
And so the induction is normally in the middle or like late July, isn't it? So this year it's a push back a little bit. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so it's normally the last weekend in July. This year it was because COVID was moving so fast in terms of in a positive way. We originally were going to do it as a made-for-TV event at the end of July, and then when it became clear that okay, we can hold this in September and actually have fans come out, we pushed it back a couple of months in order to plan for it because there's so much. And I think that's for the 4 inductees. There's 3 living inductees, and then Marvin Miller is going to be represented by Donald Fear, but. For them to have their day in the sun and be able to stand there on the stage at the Clark Sports Center in front of tens of thousands of people, if there was any way to try to do that, we really wanted to try to do that. And it feels very much now with sporting events coming back and large crowds are gathering, we're still going to be very, very careful. We're certainly encouraging masks for those who aren't vaccinated. Sure. And I think in a lot of ways, probably the attendance will depend on weather. And if it's a really nice day, I could see a lot of people driving up from New York to come see Derek Jeter get inducted. But we don't really know what to expect because it's on a Wednesday. It's usually on a Sunday. It's September. It's usually July. So kids are going right back to school. It'll be really interesting, and it'll be one I'll remember forever because it'll be my first induction that I'm in this position.
What a class to have with Jeter. Who are the other two? I couldn't think off the top of my head.
Larry Walker and Ted Simmons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so great. Cool. I mean, incredible class, multiple different eras, generations, and Marvin Miller being the guy who basically the union owes everything to. It's just another, you realize what a huge impact he had on the game. Unfortunately, not around to see his induction day, but still pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. Last question for you, totally off topic. Sure. I saw that you were able to caddy for Tom Candiotti, the former knuckleballer, big league pitcher at the Waste Management Pro-Am in Phoenix. Tell us about that experience.
Oh, man, that's so funny because he just texted me yesterday to ask how things were going here. And he said, do you need a caddy? And I said, well, what I need is you need to come out here and play leather stocking because there's an amazing course right on the lake here that is absolutely incredible. But yeah, he actually called me. So I dealt with the broadcasters regularly when I was there, and he called me at some point, I think in December, and said, "Hey, would you want to caddy for me for the Pro-Am?" And I'm like, "Are you serious?" Like, and he thought I was like offended. He's like, "No, only if you want to." I said, "No, of course I would. Are you kidding me? This is amazing." And so it was such a cool day. I mean, that tournament is one of the most attended people don't realize there's 500,000 people that come out for this tournament. And the 16th hole, you walk out and it's literally a stadium they've created around it. I mean, you get chills walking onto that tee box. And so that was really, really cool. And Candy, I don't think he landed on the green on that one, but there's a couple of good photos of me like kind of looking through my little pin seeker, trying to give him advice. Like I have any idea what I'm talking about. He's a way better golfer than I am. But for those that come to Cooperstown, there's also a really great golf course here that sits right on the lake. And yeah, that was definitely one of the more unique things I've done in quite some time, caddying for a golf tournament.
16 is the crazy party hole, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they used to have the caddy races where everybody would drop their bags and run sprints to green. And I guess they got rid of that before I got a chance to caddy. Otherwise, the money would have been on me. But pretty cool experience. And you understand in a lot of ways that this sport has delivered so many cool opportunities for me in my career. And never in a million years would I think. I mean, Tom Candiotti was a guy I watched growing up. He was on that team when I first got to the Dodgers. And now he's a broadcaster of the Diamondbacks, and I'm caddying for him, and you just realize sometimes how life comes full circle. It's pretty cool.
Wow, man. Well, that's awesome. And again, congrats on everything. Excited to see your journey at the Hall. Where can everybody follow you or follow what's going to be happening with the Baseball Hall of Fame, and maybe mention again when the induction is coming up? Yeah,
you bet. So September 8th, it'll be on MLB Network, nationally televised. Obviously, our social media channels are easy. They're just at Baseball Hall. On Twitter, Instagram, or on Facebook. You can find me. It's just my name, Josh Rawitch, on Twitter, Instagram. And we're trying to find ways to keep engaging with fans. And so hopefully fans will get involved, whether it's on social media, whether it's coming up for a visit, or just following from a distance. We appreciate everybody's support. And hopefully if somebody gets out here that was listening to this, come find me in the office and tell me you were listening to the Too Tall podcast, and I'll pull out something special for you.
All right, I'm going to send everybody out there, including myself. I want to go out there as well. So I think I'll definitely have to let you know when I can make that happen. So
would love it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Josh. Thanks again.
Thank you, Brett. Have a good one.
My thanks to Josh Rawitch. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. I really appreciate him coming on. He's got a brand new big job at the Baseball Hall of Fame. So hope you guys got something out of that. And maybe one day you'll go visit the Hall of Fame. I know I want to go back. I haven't been there in over 20 years. So it'd be really cool to go back to a good old Cooperstown, New York, and check out the Hall of Fame. And if you have time to watch Derek Jeter getting inducted, so big deal there on September 8th. Check that out, MLB Network. They'll be putting it on. So really cool stuff happening at the Baseball Hall of Fame. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram, doing a lot of new content there. Check it out. Please comment and like it and share it. That'd be awesome. You can also follow me on Twitter at Too Tall Sports. Check that out there. On YouTube, just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. You can find our channel. You can subscribe. We drop episodes every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. So you can watch the interviews there. If you want to just listen to them and you're on the go, totally understand. Check out Apple Podcasts. We have a presence there that's doing really well. A lot of good 5-star ratings. And I would like you, if you haven't done it already, to contribute to the 5-star ratings. So please do so when you get the chance. Scroll down on the main page or the episodes page, wherever it is, you'll see those stars. Go ahead and hit the 5 on the far right. That would really help us out a lot. Also, leaving a review at the bottom as well. Hopefully it's a positive review, but if you absolutely don't like it, then don't even bother, right? What's the point? But hopefully you do like it if you're at this point of the episode. So thank you very much for listening to that. Check us out on Spotify, same thing, Too Tall Sports Podcast. We're on Pandora, we're on Amazon Music, we're on Google Play, wherever you get your podcast, we are there. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode as always, and I will see you next week for another good one. Peace.